cada vez va retrocediendo posiciones. Y en este sentido, saludamos a Timothy Fiore, Chair of ISM Manufacturing PMI. Timothy, thank you so much for having us a few minutes.
Yes, good afternoon, Marta. Good to see you again.
Timothy, the September PMI reading for the manufacturing sector was 50.9%, 1.9 percentage points lower than the 52.8% recorded in August. It is the closest to 50 points it has been since 2020. Why is that?
Well, this is the weakest number that we've had since the pandemic recovery began a couple of years ago. So I think, we're following up on 5 months of softening demand. This is our 5th month that we've received lots of comments that demand is softening. And I think now it's softened to the point where it's starting to impact the production floor, where the optimism on the production floor now is not as great as it has been in the last 3 or 4 months, to the point now where our employment index is contracting. Up to this point, for the last couple of years, it's simply been because we've had very high quits rates and early retirements and difficulty in hiring people. This time, there's a clear indication from the comments that the reason for the contracting employment number is in large part due to the fact that companies are now putting hiring freezes in place. And when people are quitting, they're not as quick to replace them. So there's less of an optimism about ongoing demand in the moderate to long term. And I think you can kind of see that in the report. If you look at it all, so we've had lead times coming down 6 to 8% over the last 3 or 4 months, kind of soft. We've got new orders that have been very sluggish for the last 5 months, to the point now that they're contracting fairly heavily, but not super heavy, not to be too concerned. Production is flat. Inventory levels across the entire chain, including customer inventories, are on the rise. So I think we're getting positioned now for a much slower economy, 3 or 4 months out. I think on the PMI side, we're probably going to hang somewhere around 48 to 52 for the next 2 or 3 months.
You said the September index reading reflects companies adjusting to potential future lower demand. Do you believe this reduction in demand will drive the U.S. economy into a recession?
Well, we tend to lead the U.S. economy. Transportation is a good indicator of where manufacturing is going to go, and transportation has softened substantially according to the comments that I've gotten from the panelists. Manufacturing is now softening too, and just because we go into contraction doesn't mean that the economy goes into a recession. But we've had 6 manufacturing cycles in the last 22 years, and they've generally averaged about 34 to 35 months. This one, we're at month 28, so I'm a little bit disappointed that we're not going to exceed that 34, 35 month average. But the thing that has me most concerned is that I've been tracking the quantity of panelists who are hiring versus the ones who are not hiring. And up until this point, for every 10 companies that we've surveyed, 9 of them have been hiring and 1 has not been hiring, or they've been freezing their headcount. This month that dropped to 2 to 1. So for every 3 companies, 2 of them are hiring, but 1 of them is managing its headcount primarily through hiring freezes and attriting down to a lower level. Not so many layoffs yet, which would lead me to believe that next month's demand and the month after is still substantial enough to support the current headcounts. But clearly the panelist companies are getting ready for something different, where we're not constantly chasing demand and supply is holding us back. The supply side is easing, demand side is eased, and we need to really get the lead times down a little bit more. Demand's got to come back. Inventory has to decline a little bit so that we can get back into a demand-driven expansion. But I think probably the next 6 to 9 months is going to be sluggish, slow.
And do you believe PMI reading will come lower than 50 points in the next few months? What could this say about the economy of the United States?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, Marta, I think we're probably looking at 48 to 52 for the next 6 months, somewhere in that range. That doesn't concern me much. 48 is not what we saw in the pandemic. When we've seen recessions, the Great Recession, maybe we dropped down into the low 30s. I don't see new order numbers going much below 45, and I think if they got down to 41, 42, then that would be concerning too. I don't see a crash here. I still see that we're We're coming down the ground though. I mean, last month it felt like we were gliding along at 10 to 15,000 feet. Last month was a very high quality report with moderate expansion and everything kind of in balance. This month is a clear indication that the demand in the moderate term is suspect, and therefore panelist companies are taking the appropriate action. And that action is to not add to their headcount. And in addition, they're trying to clear up all the inventory in the entire supply chain, and that's going to take some time. They've been at it now for 5 months, just by virtue of the fact that our new order number has been sluggish for 5 months. So they're working on it, but there's probably, depending on the industry, there's several more months to go. And I think the other comment here is our chemical sector, which is our number 2 sector in the U.S. manufacturing economy, has been contracting for 3 months, not only on the new order side, but also at its own PMI side. We're now down in the low 40s, and that sector tends to feed a lot of other industry sectors, and in large part the building trades, the building materials, construction materials. So we've had 3 straight months now of contraction, and I think that's a pretty good indicator that we're headed for something not as dynamic as we have been in the last, since the pandemic recovery began last summer, a couple summers ago.
Well, we will monitor carefully the evolution of this data. Thank you so much, Timothy Fiore, Chair of ISM Manufacturing PMI. It's a pleasure.
Thanks, Marta.
Nosotros, por tanto, nos quedamos con esa